All right, let's begin. Welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning as we talk about embracing the customer journey of the future. I'm joined by a distinguished panel of people. Before we jump into introductions, I wanted to touch on a few logistical notes. First of all, we'll have time at the end for audience Q&A and encourage everyone to think about questions. You can submit questions during the webinar, and we'll take time to answer them at the end of the session. During the webinar today, we'll also be running a few polls. Encourage everyone to participate and seed the discussion with the panel here. And then finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available to everyone on the line, as well as those who have registered and didn't have an opportunity to join live this morning. All right, let's jump in. We have a very distinguished panel. I'm thrilled to be joined by three industry luminaries, I guess we would say. I'm going to go last in these introductions, but why don't we go from left to right? And Michael Dolloff, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hey, everyone. Glad to be on. I'm been in the contact center technology industry for about 15 years and have seen a number of different revolutions. Of course, this one we're going to talk about today with some of the AI topics is certainly one of the, if not the most transformative. But I've been really helping companies the last few years with really strategy, selection, implementation, optimization, and iteration of all those CX technologies. So sort of bring a broad breadth of customers at all stages of the life cycle of where they're at in maturity, where they're at in their journey of AI and advanced CX technologies, and glad to be on.
Thank you. Andrew.
Hey, Mike, good to see you again. Thanks for having me. Andrew Pryfogle, I'm the leader of market development for AVANT Communications. AVANT is a technology services distributor that works through a network of trusted advisors all over the country, people just like Mike Dolloff here at Inflow. We're big fans of. I've been in the space for longer than I can remember. Certainly the recent innovations around AI over the past couple of years have been really transformative for the space, specifically around customer experience technology. I love what Quiq is doing, and I think it'll be a fascinating conversation together today as we kind of explore how organizations can leverage AI to drive really meaningful outcomes and the role that Quiq can play in that. So thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. And Hans?
Yeah, great to be here. My name is Hans Slam. I'm one of the founders at Conversation Design Institute. And what we really focus on is, what does the skill set look like to develop good conversational AI? So if companies want to use AI to talk to people, we try to help them figure out, what kind of conversation do you want to have with customers? How do you design that, whether that's with LLMs or still in the NLU world? But also more importantly, what does the whole department look like that's going to be working on this? Like, who's going to be working there? What kind of skill set do they need? What are they going to be doing all day? And at CDI, we try to systemize that as much as possible through the CDI standards framework. And on one hand, we have a educational part of the company. So we certify people and we skill them up, but we also have a consulting practice, and we work closely with Quiq and truly love what they're doing and how they're building out the product.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm Mike Myer. I'm CEO and founder of Quiq. We're a company that's focused on building the next generation of interactions between businesses and consumers. Those interactions can occur on multiple channels and actually transfer seamlessly between, and hence the Seamless Journeys title of today's webinar. And of course, given the transition and rapid advancement that's occurred in AI, those conversations can be powered by AI. They also can be powered by humans. And we're going to spend a lot of the time talking today about the AI aspect of those conversations. So let's jump in. To kick things off, I'm going to call out a few points. First of all, and this is a survey that was done by Menlo Ventures. First of all, enterprise spending in 2024 on AI increased by 6x year over year. And that's not surprising. AI was pretty quiet and it was actually emerging in 2023. And so in 2024, we've seen this rapid initial deployment of this latest generation of generative AI. And not surprisingly, other surveys have shown that the expected spend in future years is considerably more. And the second half of the screen then, 72% of the decision makers expect broader adoption of generative AI in the near future. It's pretty clear that this AI thing, it is a thing. And the scope of how big the impact is going to be, we'll talk about as we go through this webinar. But I don't think there's anybody in business at this point in time who is, in a leadership role that's not worried or excited about the opportunity for AI in their business. So, to start the discussion, I'm going to pose a question, and I'm going to actually answer my own question and then open it up for the panel to provide some input. But there's been an emerging term, and that's agentic AI. And this term existed probably behind the scenes for quite some time, but it really hasn't existed in the common nomenclature that we use between vendors and businesses really until the last couple months. And so there's a lot of confusion maybe in the industry and on the CX leader part of the equation on terms of like, what does agentic AI really mean? And so let me give you a definition of what agentic AI is. And to a certain extent, I think this definition is really a clarification of what a lot of people were using just the general term AI to mean in the past. And so agentic AI defined, I'm going to read this definition and then we're going to have a little bit of discussion about it. So agentic AI is a type of AI designed to exhibit autonomous reasoning, goal-directed behavior, and a sense of self or agency, rather than simply following pre-programmed instructions or reacting to external stimuli. Agentic AI systems may interact with humans in a way that is similar to human-to-human interaction, such as through natural language processing or other forms of communication. Okay, so there's the dictionary definition. I think the key points that I would call out here is and this is what I think a lot of people assumed when we talked about AI for customer experience. They assumed that the AI was going to be able to actually reason, accomplish goals, and have some way to interact seamlessly in a way that it would replace potentially a human agent doing some of the same characteristics. So that's the definition of agentic AI. Panelists, what do you think about this new emerging term?
I'll jump in first. Look, I think there's a lot of, first off, I'm glad you defined this, Mike, because I think a lot of the problem in this space is all these new terms without a lack of kind of standard definition, right? We just create more confusion on top of confusion. But I think you're right. Like a lot of this is happening today. And maybe we're just calling it plain AI, right? Or things like that. But I think you're right. There's a couple key pieces in this, right? Intelligently automating and facilitating interactions. I think some people think of AI as just like, hey, I'm going to query and I'm going to get a response back, right? I'm going to ask a question and get a response. But how are you facilitating with agentic AI more of that full interaction? How are you automating kind of the steps beyond that and kind of seeing that journey through versus just sort of a transaction, a one and done transaction? And I think, the promise, of course, of all this is sort of this achievement of the sort of triple crown, right? Of like, if I'm running a contact center, how do I get efficiency, which means cost savings, so I don't have to spend as much cost to handle questions, inbound, outbound, whatever that is, right? How do I also, because we know AI in the past, just the general AI term is, sometimes people have like this fear of like, yeah, like I can do that and I can just anger all my customers, because we've experienced that, right, as consumers, where it's AI or automation of some degree that's very customer centric, but not very company centric, not customer centric. So how do I, create the cost efficiencies, create good CX? And actually the third piece of this too is like, what does that do for my employees, right? Both frontline agents and other staff. And I think if agentic has the potential, and we're seeing the use cases work and check the boxes for all three of those. Create cost efficiencies, create good customer experiences, and improve employee experience. That's sort of like the nirvana we're trying to get to, right?
Trifecta.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. Just to build off of that, guys, I think we've all, as Mike said, we've all experienced what I would call automation gone wrong, right? Where a company with the best of intentions is trying to automate my interaction, and it results in me just getting frustrated as a consumer, right? And I think the promise of agentic is really interesting, because how many times have we asked a question of a chat bot or of a voice bot, and if I don't ask it in a very specific way, it doesn't have a very relevant answer to me, right? And that just results in a really frustrating experience. Agentic is now, I mean, the promise of being able to kind of use some human-like reason in determining what the actual intent is, and then to be able to take that intent and take actual actions as a result of it. That's a very promising thing, and we're starting to, as Mike said, we're starting to see some really practical use cases of that, both on the side of driving costs out of a contact center, by driving increased efficiencies, but frankly also being able to leverage that kind of technology to even drive increase in conversion rates, right? So there's a revenue side of this equation as well that I think is starting to really show itself in some very exciting ways for businesses that where they can use this tech to drive increased sales, even 24 hours a day, right, when their contact centers are closed. So it's an exciting development for sure.
Yeah, I think if I kind of track the generations of conversational AI and the general interactions with customers, there was generation one, and you had chatbots that were really basically keyword driven, and based on a keyword that the customer might say, we were going to spit out just a standard answer whenever that keyword was detected. And so that was kind of like early stages. That was like the 2016, 2017 kind of chatbot era. And then natural language processing entered into the scene, and we started to build corpuses of training data where we could, instead of just looking for one keyword, we could look at a set of phrases that all matched to the same intent. And then again, we were going to respond with a fixed answer for all of those different phrases that map to that intent. And so that was kind of like the next generation. And then the generation after that is really the evolution that occurred when GPT and large language models showed up on the scene. And we had LLMs that now, for the first time, we could actually respond to people's questions with bespoke answers, not just a static answer that attempted to cover all possible questions for a particular intent. And so in the first generation of generative, what we had was basically kind of like more powerful knowledge systems where the customer said something, we did a good knowledge search, we got one or multiple pieces of information back from a knowledge source, and then we combined those things together and we're able to give a response. And so the differentiation that I see for agentic is the building on top of the ability to provide a bespoke response from knowledge, but also the ability to detect when, in some cases, I may not want to actually just provide an answer. I may want to actually help the user accomplish something. And the example I could give for this would be, imagine a customer asks, like, what's the return policy? Well, that's a question about the policy, and the answer to that is probably static information. But if the customer asks, how do I make a return? That's probably an indication that they want to actually do a return. And in that particular case, instead of saying like, here's the steps to do it, a more helpful assistant or an agent would actually help them do the return. And that's really what, as I think about the difference in agentic, it moves beyond being able to just answer a question to help people go through a process to accomplish a goal. Answering a question is a piece of it, but accomplishing goals is a much bigger piece of it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, like the promise of all these generations has been the same. And it feels, it was always like, oh, you can start doing this, you can start helping customers in a better way. So automation goals, customer experience goals, cost to serve is going to go down. But it was always, you ended up, because it was so complex still, right? You could only do so much work and everything was manual. So very few companies moved, beyond what we call like level one, level two AI assistants, FAQ bots, maybe a few integrated journeys. You can do a few things, but that you already hit a ceiling. And now because agentic could do a lot of stuff automatically and autonomously, I think you're going to see a lot of companies now break through that ceiling and basically almost catching up to the promise of conversational AI that was always there. So then I kind of wonder, is this now indeed what you need, or is there still something like a next generation where you're like, oh, actually we hadn't thought about that? Because now all of a sudden the problem shifts from scripting all the journeys to, oh, making sure that all your content is structured properly to make sure that an AI can actually use it and provide good value. So there's still probably like a few blind spots that we might have around agentic, but it's definitely going to push us now to a higher level of automation and better experiences for people. But I find it interesting. It's almost like catching up to the original promise of conversational AI.
100%. Yeah. As technologists, maybe we tend to get a little excited sometimes and overstate what's possible. And you're right. The technology is catching up to the vision here. Okay. I'm going to move ahead, and we're going to open up to the audience for the first poll. So you should see a poll window pop up somewhere on your screen. The question is, does your business plan to increase its investment in agentic AI in 2025? And choices are yes by a lot, yes by a little, no, or unsure. Folks, if you would please click a button and provide us some feedback here. Based on the fact that you are attending this webinar, I'm hoping that not a lot of people are in the no category, and it's just a matter of how many people are in a lot category or a little category. Okay, I called it there a little bit. So I hope there's nobody in the no category, and there was nobody in the no category. So that's great. Unsure, that is... thank you for being honest. There's a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders who are at this point trying to understand how much they should invest and plot their course through AI and understand what's possible. And so thank you for joining today in order to able to actually learn a little bit more about and hopefully plot your course. Panelists, any observations or thoughts about that poll result?
Mike, I find that really interesting. I suppose not very surprising, right? We were having some discussions recently as a group about how companies are currently budgeting around AI, and it's interesting that AI with the pace of innovation around AI right now, it doesn't really run on a calendar budget or a fiscal budget cycle, right? Trying to decide today what I'm going to invest over the next 12 months around AI is very difficult if I don't really have a sense of what it's going to look like just in 6 months from now. I mean, the new capabilities coming on the scene every single day, the stuff that we can do today that wasn't even on the radar just a couple of short years ago. So I think it's really putting the impetus on a lot of businesses to start to think in a very different way about how they try out this stuff, right? This idea of an agile process to evaluating different AI technologies and getting your foot in the water and trying to test some things and try some things and iterate on that as you would in any agile process. I think that's going to become more of the reality that will start to answer that question around a lot for the people in the unknown category that are still right now struggling with. I'm not sure how I budget or plan for this right now because it's moving so fast, right? I think there needs to be a different mindset to get people to take some action, because it is really, really important that businesses start to take action around this.
Yeah, and if you wait for things to calm down, that you might be left behind. at the current moment, because it's probably going to be a little while, if ever, that things are going to calm down to the way it was before.
No doubt.
Just a quick comment on it too is I don't know if this played into any of the answers on that poll, but there is a lot of maturing still that needs to happen in the kind of commercialization of the AI market. Just like there's really disparate models of how these technologies are consumed, and because we're entering this phase of new. This is new. There's not like, oh, I'm replacing a current system or current spend. There's interaction models, consumption models, kind of a more traditional SaaS-like user model. I mean, there's lots of different ways these things are approached. I think that actually creates some confusion and complexity too. We see when we help customers through the ROI piece of this, like comparing vendor A to vendor B, like there's a completely different model in some cases, right? So I don't know if that's part of the poll answering, but I think that creates some uncertainty of exactly how to invest, kind of tying off of Andrew's point of there's the speed of investment and how to do that, but also there's wow, this whole market is very different, like vendor to vendor, on how they price and you consume this and how that scales over time.
All right. Well, let me keep the conversation going here. I'm going to change the flow a little bit and ask a new question to the panel. And so the question is, what challenges will companies face as they look to create more seamless customer journeys using agentic AI? Panelists, what do you think? What are the challenges?
I'll throw out one real quick, and I'm curious to get my colleagues' feedback on this. We're seeing a lot of emphasis right now where around what I guess we can term as AI governance, right? A lot of companies that are intrigued with the possibilities around AI, but are trying to figure out how they maintain some controls around it. How do they put up guardrails? There's nervousness around that. I think there's a tendency where AI governance is being put on the plate of IT, of a CIO, or in legal, right? And I think the businesses that are moving far more rapidly in this area are actually realizing that governance needs to also be a business decision. It needs to be the business leaders have to be chiming in here and helping to shape the governance policy, because this is a new frontier, and the tendency of IT leaders to want to lock down an environment for good reason, right? There's lots of important considerations there, but without the business side of it being able to respond is I think is a limiting factor, and it's something that I think a lot of businesses are struggling with right now. They'll wrestle with that through 2025 as a challenge as they decide to, how do we accelerate adoption in a world where governance is such an important priority.
Yeah, and it's kind of ethics has always, if you take that umbrella, has always been an afterthought. But here, like, it needs to be priority, and it seems like the only way to do that properly is to tie ethics into business speak. Basically, instead of ethics, it's about risk mitigation. It is about brand. It is about your core value. So there is now, with the increased adoption of AI, there's an increased need for trust and risk mitigation. And should your AI all of a sudden say something that is, you're going to regret the next day, the consequences of that can be so severe. So it is about, creating a code of conduct for your AI and monitoring that it's actually following that, and being, developing a culture in your organization where people think almost like ethics first. What do we want it to do? Developing principles around that. We always have this little thing of like, take a deep breath before you do anything. It's like, if you start deploying anything, take a deep breath, think about your customers. What do you want that experience to be? And then make sure that you have everything in place rather than just, ship it and wing it. Like, you can't really YOLO generative AI. I think that's kind of like the big lesson that everybody's experiencing now.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's interesting. I think that we talked about how the technology is changing quickly. Business leaders' perception of AI and willingness to take risk associated with AI is changing also. Like, if I think back a year ago, we had a lot of conversations where people were like, I don't know if we can do AI because there's a bunch of risk associated with it. And a lot of those conversations have now shifted from I don't know if I think we can do AI to we want to understand how to manage the risk. And so it's almost like the analogy that I use is driving a car is has a possibility of an accident. But we all accept that fact every day. But we do things to try to mitigate the risk. Like we have airbags, for instance, to reduce the possibility of injury in the accident. But we're still driving. And I mean, I think the same thinking applies to the adoption of AI. You need to understand the risk, but to the extent that your implementation of AI, and this is important, that you understand how the AI works, because understanding removes a lot of the fear. When you understand how something works, then it's not as scary. And so having an AI implementation where you can have ground level observability and you can understand exactly why the system is working the way it does, and you have testing and the ability to replay, et cetera. So there's a bunch of things in a platform that makes perhaps AI less scary, and it feeds into the organization policy where, we've talked about like the organization needs to understand how it's going to manage AI, and you can only manage AI if you understand what it's doing.
Yeah, I want to add a couple things on all what you've said. This is great. We were actually, Andrew and I got to hear from a practitioner last week that first off, I think a lot of the AI conversation within the enterprise has happened driven by the contact center, right? Unlike other transformations, maybe I think about just sort of the cloud, overall enterprise technology moving to cloud. A lot of that happened with more mundane business applications, right? Like Office 365 and things like that, right? That wasn't necessarily contact center. That was other parts of the organization. The AI stuff has, in a lot of organizations, been driven or started within the contact center. And we were listening to this CX leader last week, talking with him, and he was sharing how, 3 years ago they started on this deeper journey into sort of agentic AI capabilities within the organization, and it forced the governance conversation. So I think there's a lot of CX leaders who've developed a lot of new muscles, new scars probably through the last couple of years of this. There's a lot of other ones out there who will have to do that, right? Like be the tip of the spear, the pioneer in kind of driving some of this consideration of ethics and governance and guardrails. And I think that's a challenge, right? Like, because you've got your quote unquote day job, and then you got this sort of transformative thing that's not just within the contact center. It's going to bleed out into the broader enterprise that you have to, sort of take on in some cases, because there's not somebody else taking it on in the enterprise. But I think a huge challenge, and this isn't unique necessarily to agentic AI, but this is the thing I see more often than not tripping up companies, is just inertia. I mean, there's so much sort of technical and tech stack debt and operational and process debt, data debt, right? Or a dearth of data to help with things. These are all these sort of drags and headwinds to organizations I see all the time. I actually think, right, I'm not seeing this, but this is my sort of where I think newer companies starting up, agile, small, maybe not some of that, the debt, right, accumulation, that can kind of immediately lean into building out some of their go-to-market and their workflows and customer journeys with agentic AI will be far down this path. And then all the other organizations that have all this sort of debt, they have to manage through that quickly, right? Because you're going to start seeing, I think, organizations in the next little bit get outmaneuvered pretty quickly by a small, agile company that maybe now there's more complexity, right? Brand awareness and all these other things that will not make this just this huge shift. But I think in general, like, that's a reality. I think a lot of organizations should feel a little bit of fear of not being able to move quick enough, because we're seeing that's the drag. There's just all this inertia. There's all this debt pulling back this really transformative stuff that is untapped. And so I think that's not that sexy or intelligent of an answer to it, but that's the reality of what we're seeing out in the field day in and day out with organizations. They want to do it, but there's all these things, all these reasons, excuses, right? That why they can't get there. Of course, that's part of our role, is helping them knock down those barriers to make it happen. But there's a lot of work to that. I mean, we're a smaller, pretty agile company, and you got to work hard just to do some of these things, because you've got, current tech, current processes, and you have to figure out how to rethink and reimagine some of these things, so you're not sort of shackled by, well, we did it this way because that's the limitations of the tech or the limitations of what was possible at the time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comment. I think I use this phrase fairly regularly, and it's kind of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think a lot of organizations are like, well, I need to go and like rebuild all my knowledge, or we need to wait until like this system rationalization project occurs where we like unify a whole bunch of systems, or we need to wait for this big API project. And then once we have that in place, then we can start to build AI on top of. And my belief is that you don't have to boil the ocean in the first pass. Like, pick a use case. Maybe it's not even your highest volume use case. Maybe it's in the middle of the pack. Pick a use case that can be reasonably handled by AI and just get started. Dip the toe in the water, get smarter, move ahead. Because I think the folks who are like, I'm waiting for my infrastructure to be perfect so I can put on AI on top of it, they're going to miss out on the learnings and the knowledge and the organizational growth that could occur just by dipping their toe in the water first before the back end is perfect.
Hey, Mike, I'd love to get your take on one quick thing. It's a bit of a different angle on this as well when it comes to governance. There's this perception that as I go down this road, it increases risk or, right, in errors to happen, hallucinations, whatever. The auditability of AI is so far superior to what we've always used in kind of, human interactions, right? And I think we oftentimes forget that if I have a live agent in a contact center go rogue on me, say something they shouldn't be saying, swear at a customer, whatever it might be, right? We've all experienced those types of things as consumers. That is not easily auditable for most businesses that are maybe sampling 2% of their interactions, right? Yet AI can absolutely make that auditable. There's some additional that actually reduces risk, not increase risk, right? What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious what Quiq's take is on that.
Andrew, I think that's a really good point. And folks on the session have probably heard me or maybe have heard me say in the past, like, everybody's focused on making AI perfect. AI is based on intelligence. Intelligence is based on training. Training is not always perfect. But to the extent that the AI can perform with a higher level of quality than your current agent pool can, and it has the ability to then, as you mentioned, Andrew, to be able to manage itself and detect things that are, raise my hand when I'm not doing well type thing, which is something that an agent won't be able to do. I think that there's a double standard at the current point in time that it's going to, over time, as more and more AI implementations are out in the world and people are more comfortable, I think the risk tolerance associated with AI will be a little bit less, and the threshold needs to be, can I provide a better level of quality than I currently am with my current human agents? Yeah. And if I can, that's an overall actually risk reduction for the business, yeah, as opposed to a risk increase.
There is if you look at conversations of like what makes a good conversation, there are very clear linguistic patterns that make a conversation good. Like at each message, at the level of each message, it's like acknowledgement, a confirmation, a prompt, active language, human-centered language. Those are things that you can scan for. You can do that also with your current agents to get down to that level, but not a lot of them are doing that. But for your AI, if you would create a code of conduct of this is how we want to speak and this is the requirement that we have for each message, and so at CDI we have a background in behavioral psychology, so we all know how we can use anchoring and persuasion, all social proof, all these different techniques in language that you can just program and check for, and that allows you to have tremendous control over the quality of your AI. So I think a lot of people are very focused on, are we saying the right, is it factually correct? But we all know the thing is not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think it's often that's something that we're not talking about enough, but actually the how we say it can be quantified quite easily and checked for as well.
Yeah,
good point. Okay, good conversation. Let me move ahead. And next on the agenda, we've got another poll for the audience. So on the screen, you should see now a pop-up, and this is a thought-provoking one. By the end of 2025, what percentage of contact center inquiries do you think will be handled by AI without human involvement? And so you can answer that in a general sense or for your own particular organization. Hopefully, it's probably more tailored towards your own organization. And we'll give folks a moment or two. While folks are voting, panelists, does anybody want to share what your vote would be or your answer to this question would be?
I'd say more than 50.
I agree. Okay, so we've had in the actual results, at least 25% leads the pack. Up to 50, 18, so 25 to 50, 18%, more than 50, 18%, no more than 10, 13%. So interesting distribution there. I'd classify that as probably cautiously optimistic in the up to 25 category.
Yeah. It kind of depends. Like we have this framework of question or journeys that go from simple to complex and they're grounded in generic or sensitive information. And it kind of depends per organization what your threshold is. So if I sell umbrellas, and I build AI to answer questions and help people, like my risk tolerance, it doesn't matter. Like what's the worst that can happen? But if we have people in the audience that are in pharma or in healthcare, then of course those numbers switch very quickly, right? But based on those thresholds, what do you want to do scripted? What do you want to do with Gen AI? And what do you want to have done with agents? You can kind of figure out for yourself what that ratio looks like.
Johns, Man, I hope you're right about greater than 50%. That would be that'd be fantastic. And I think we will definitely get there. Whether that'll happen in 2025, I don't know yet. I think to Michael's point earlier, inertia is a very powerful thing, and there's a bunch of brands out there that are gonna through 2025 will still continue to kind of struggle around how they break through that to start adopting this stuff. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that I don't have to automate 50% of my interactions for it to be a massive game changer for my business, right? If I have think about it, a 2,000 employee company that gets just a 10% increase in efficiency, that might mean that they don't have to hire 200 people next year, right? That translates into a really big number, and I think those types of incremental improvements around efficiencies, especially in the contact center, as we were talking about, even a 10, 15, 20% improvement translates into really, really big dollars coming back into the business. And I think those things are very, very attainable for almost every company out there, regardless of product or service. Ultimately, I think getting to the 50+% is very much a reality. Whether we get there in 2025 will be interesting.
I agree. A corollary to the question that we ask in the poll would be, how long do you think it will be until a consumer that has to contact a company is hoping that they get connected with AI instead of a human agent? And I mean, that's when we'll actually have been really successful about what we're talking here, is when the consumers understand that, like, actually what an AI interaction is going to be preferable because it's available anytime. It's the quality is on par or better than potentially a random human agent that I might be connected with. And so that for me, that's kind of the litmus test of like when we've actually done achieved our goal and done the job that we're talking about doing here. It's when consumers recognize that, like, hey, this stuff actually works potentially better than humans.
I guess we also got to lose the stigma of the old chatbots that weren't working, because people are now just like, okay, get me away from that little box on the website, right? But it's interesting. We're all traumatized by those bad chatbots. At the same time, we play around with ChatGPT, so when we now see it, we don't know what to expect when we reach out to a brand. But yeah, once you start having a few good experiences with companies, I would say it's going to switch over pretty quickly. And people will recognize, like, oh, this is agentic. This is one of the good ones. Oh, this is one of those old guys. I'm going to avoid that one.
That's it.
You are seeing some of that happen too, because, when we work with customers, there are times as we're analyzing data and in some of their interactions that, customers are basically like thanking the AI and stuff, right? Like they know they're interacting with software and machine, but it's become the point of where, and again, they're not tricked by it, right? But and I don't think the goal would be to trick them, but basically it's become conversational enough, it's become intelligent enough, and they're like, trained through social norms to be like, hey, thank you so much for the help. We would never say thank you so much for the help to a robot, would we? But we do, right? We're starting to see some of that blending happening, right? So, but I'm in agreement. I'm more cautiously optimistic with this too. I think we're a long ways still from the majority of interactions globally. I think there'll be pockets across the world maybe that, accelerate faster, and there's others that are laggards, of course, but I still think we're a ways away from the majority of the interactions being handled, which I will get there. I think the majority, but I think it's a ways.
But there's also the part, like, you have companies that are like, oh, we've got these 200 FAQs about this product, so people can now ask questions about that quite easily. But if you got 200 FAQs about your product, then just fix your products. Because it's also like, because now it's like, oh, we can answer the questions. That's great, but that's not the problem you should be solving, right? So there's also confusion around that, I always notice.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. We all woke up this morning to news of what Amazon's largest employee strike ever in the middle of holiday shopping season. Holy cow! How many brands that source through that platform are being impacted by that today? How many interactions are they getting hammered with today with those types of questions? That's an example of where this stuff can really, really shine. And in the outcomes that you can drive, Mike, that you were referencing, I like to call it delightful automation, right? That it actually produces a better outcome than if I was to call in or chat or email into a live human. That is very much a reality today. It's achievable for most brands. And I think the brands that really get out in front of that, especially in a day like this, are probably going to shine versus those that aren't. And I think a lot of separation is going to happen there amongst brands because of it.
Oh, also, as we think about the adoption of this technology, and Andrew, you're spot on. Like any type of event that it leads to just a mass outpour of customer inquiries, that's a perfect example of how AI can handle. And then for the brands that are impacted by the Amazon situation, there's probably not a lot they can say at this point in time because they don't actually know the answer either, right? Like they don't know when the packages are going to go through because they don't know when people are going to go back to work. Like it's a bunch of undefined, and they don't at this point in time they don't have a backup plan in place because that stuff is still being formulated at this point in time. So there's undoubtedly customers reaching out, but then the brands also don't have a lot of answers, and so they're going to have to kind of like deal with that spike in a graceful way. And AI would be a good way to kind of provide the whatever level of assurance that they currently have in the business. But it does come down to I think it's an interesting time too from a consumer education standpoint. And I'm sure that folks have probably seen there's a Google Pixel TV commercial now that plays quite a bit, and it talks about how you can just go ask Pixel any question that you want. If you want to talk, you can go talk to Pixel. And like it's starting to create CX is one part of the equation, but as consumers overall get more comfortable with like I'm interacting with something that is conversing with me, the expectations of the consumers are going to transfer from like it's not just about like asking a question to Pixel about how to change my oil. It's actually asking a question to a brand, and they're going to expect that same level of interaction. So consumer training and understanding is going to be something I think will advance quite a bit in 2025, as in other parts of their lives, they're interacting with AI. And so when they come to CX, they'll expect to interact with CX with AI as well.
Yeah, I think there's if you look at satisfiers and dissatisfiers, of like when people reach out, they want an answer immediately and they want the system to understand it. And if it doesn't, it's a big dissatisfaction. So I think that's a problem that can be solved. Like we get our questions in, it can help us, great. But then if you look at, sort of an experience that anchored in a customer's memory, that's going to be still difficult with AI. And I think that's where people will always shine. So if you think about like peak end rule of the whole customer journey, how do you optimize for creating high impact touch points that people are going to remember and tell their friends about? That's, first is going to be like, oh, AI is getting better. It's pretty cool. And you tell your friends. But once companies get to that new level, you're kind of really looking to do that with humans, and or at least that's probably where it's going to be difficult to do that with AI. So the real satisfiers are probably still going to come from humans. But, AI is going to create a lot of room for people to have those conversations and create those experiences for people. So that's the fun part about it.
I'm totally in agreement with Hans on that. I think that future state, I think what's interesting, if you look at polling too, a lot of the kind of frontline CX staff and, so agents and managers are at best ambivalent, unsure, what AI means to them. But more than likely they have a negative impression of what that means. Now, because a lot of people talk about, hey, there's job displacements and things like that. A lot of, as you talk to customers that are adopting, a lot of that happens through natural attrition, right? Because there's turnover in the contact center. But there is this gap between, I think, some of those within the enterprise who will actually benefit the most from agentic AI, agents and supervisors and managers and frontline staff, are the ones least aware of the benefits and most concerned. There's a gap that organizations through change management need to address there. Because I think actually, like what Hans said, I think is true, right? You're going to have a lot of the lower mundane aspects of the customer journey can be handled in a way that's not only efficient, not only can increase revenue, but gives good CSAT. Because if you look at the kind of, we've not been doing well overall as an overall space with contact centers technology use and capabilities have increased, but we have not seen the needle move up with like customers are getting happier, better service overall. Sure, there's cases in certain industries and companies that are, but overall, those things are inverse, right? So technology's up and CSAT's down. I hope, and I think the potential with agentic is to change those and have those start going in directions you want to see. The benefit, of course, within the organization can be tremendous, right? To what Hans is saying is like, you've got now humans to be used for these really higher touch, higher value, more complex, where the need for empathy and other things is there, and those really kind of critical experience moments. That's where I think you can harness the power of this. It's that, for me, it's the blend, right? And some people have a perspective of, no, it's 100% AI. That's where we're going, maybe. But I think the blend is probably where it will be really powerful. And I think some companies are starting to get there quickly, but most aren't. But that's where you need to get to. That's where I think, I don't think the value of humans in the customer experience interaction handling realm is far from gone, in my opinion. And certainly the answer is not, we're not going back into time and just throwing more bodies at the problem here, like more interactions, more stuff. That's not the answer for sure. But throwing tech at it historically has not worked either. So the hope is, right, agentic AI can really change that trend of really being the tech that can change the direction of where things are heading here.
Okay, we could go all day with this conversation. Like really good thoughts. Let's move ahead, and I want to release the last poll, and then we're going to open up the floor for and talk about some of the questions that we've already received, and open up the floor for additional questions. So this poll, which of today's topics did you find most intriguing, and would you like to learn more about in 2025? And so we'll see what folks think. Everybody click one of those 5 choices, and we'll see what you felt was most interesting in today's conversation. People are thinking, deep thought. Okay, so again, pretty evenly spread, um, with agentic AI versus the previous generation being the leader there. Panelists, what was your favorite topic today? I think mine was actually just doing a webinar with like a group of three really smart people in the space.
I feel like that's a cheating answer, Mike. Like, you gotta put your stick in the sand somewhere on there, man. Come on. I think I love the agentic versus previous too, because I do think there's a lot of confusion, and I loved your description of the evolution there, right? Sort of the basic IVR and chatbot, keyword driven, and that sort of evolution progression. What's interesting as you're describing that is, for many organizations, they might be in 1.0 still, right? They're like, all these evolutions are not like this linear curve. Like they're all going on concurrently, which sort of makes a lot of this confusion happen and stuff like that. But I honestly think one of the biggest challenges overall in this space is just having honest conversations like this, like explaining things. Like, I think oftentimes you walk into a room and we start talking AI and everyone assumes they're the only person who doesn't know what this means or that means. The truth is most people in the room don't. And we're all sort of just pretending and faking. And like, let's just be open and honest and discuss and break things down simply and talk so we can move through. I think there's a big language barrier here. The tech industry is great at throwing out new words and 3-letter acronyms and things like that create these barriers of really like progressing. I've been through many engagements with customers around technologies where like 6 months into it, they go, what does this acronym mean? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like shame on me, shame on us, right? Like for doing that. Like, these are barriers for people understanding. So anyways, I love that you break that down into that, like, kind of really simple terms of what it is and also where this evolution's been going. So
Dolloff, that's like a great lead into like the question. So if folks do have questions, we won't even call out your name in terms of who asked the question. So if there are some things that have been bothering you and you didn't want to ask in the conference room, feel free to ask it in this session. And I might actually jump through a few of these. Bernie Arneson, I'm going to call you out because I know you don't mind. Good to see you here. You made a comment that the question of I raised the question of when people would prefer to actually speak with a AI versus a human, and you said, well, actually, maybe the better question is how long before consumers can't tell the difference between AI and human. Yes, that's true. It's kind of the same corollary, because people will prefer to speak to the AI when they can't tell the difference. I will say, I don't think it's the intent of anybody on this call to actually trick people and think that AI is a human. And I think just from a best practice and just a fairness and honesty when dealing with your customers, I don't think anybody wants to actually get to the spot of like, we're going to put AI in the place of humans and pretend that it's a human on the other side. We should always be open and transparent that like you are interacting with an AI agent.
Definitely, but I think it's going to be easier to fake people if to trick them if you want to. That's the as you were talking, what I realized, like this morning, I was trying to do like some legal documentation. I used ChatGPT, and I think, oh, this is absolutely genius, and it's so good, and it's like a real lawyer. But why is that? It's because I'm not a legal expert. Because I know that when I want an LLM to create something that I actually have a good understanding of, I'm always like, this is intern level. This is not good enough, right? So it's if you don't have the domain expertise, it's quite easy to trick someone. So when a customer reaches out to a brand, of course the brand knows more about its products and its policies. So you can trick them into stuff quite easily, but it's always, bad conduct to do so. And there's no issue in telling people, it's an AI. I can do X, Y, Z, and for the other stuff, I have great colleagues that can help you.
Yeah, there's another question that says, in our experience, are there still language dialect challenges with AI? I'm happy to chime in, but panel, does anybody else want to chime in before I do?
Take it away, Mike.
Okay, so I think language and dialect. The language translation problem with large language models has largely been eliminated. Like you can have a chatbot on an agent on your website and serve customers in many different questions, in many different languages simultaneously. And like the language responses are really good and it happens automatically. So it just kind of like the base language translation cost problem has fundamentally kind of like it's went away almost with large language models. The underlying of language and dialect primarily comes in spoken language. And so if you're doing a voice agent, and it's amazing. The voice space is transitioning so fast, and the underlying technologies are available for speech recognition and text to speech, and the ability to understand dialogue and a dialect, and even insert some dialect. Like it's crazy how fast this is moving, and at one point in time, one vendor might be really good, another point in time, another vendor might be really good, and that's part of the reason we've built our platform to really be from those technologies perspective agnostic, so that we can swap in other technologies and whatever happens to be best for a particular use case. So short answer, it's getting better. Language and dialect in spoken language is still it can be an issue, but it's way better than what you would have been associated with like the state of the art 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I feel like as journeys get more complex, you get people emotionally more invested. Conversations are longer, therefore people are more committed and more invested, and design has to get more nuanced and sort of be aware of that. So that's why the more complex the journey, the more control you kind of want to have over the journey. And also the translations get more nuanced as well. So if it's like somebody asks a question in a dialect, you want to give a good answer, you want to adjust it a little bit maybe for their context, that's all super simple. But as the stakes increase, the risks sort of become bigger proportionally to the journey. So that's why you can never just fully hit auto translate on more complex stuff.
For sure. Let me in the few minutes remaining, let me check off a few more questions. There was another question about, I think we talked about it earlier. There's rapid acceptance and everybody's moving towards AI in customer experience. But what about sales and the conversion of an e-commerce journey and product selection in an e-commerce journey? And I mean, the short answer is there's not as much kind of like noise in the space around AI in those use cases. But we've implemented those things several times, have gotten really good results, like AI on the other side of a targeted ad and like 10 times return on ad spend, things like that. So it's there. I think the world has kind of like assumed that CX, customer service in particular, is the first place you should implement AI. But the AI use cases in the purchase journey, not just the customer service journey, there's a ton of value to be had there as well. So, and then I'll ask one more question. Will sentiment analysis become a must-have for agents to truly understand through tone of voice, et cetera? I think in general, I mean, sentiment analysis is one piece of overall kind of like conversation understanding and conversation analytics and quality management. I think that table stakes, in the past, we had a generation of vendors who like their whole purpose in this tech stack was to do quality management. And with this generation of AI that we have now, quality management can really be built into every application that exists inside of your CX stack. And so I think needing a separate application, that won't be necessary in the future. I think that like you should expect and you should ask vendors how they're doing quality today. For instance, in our product, we can in real time grade the conversation. We can classify like what the question was about. We can determine whether or not specific goals for the conversation have been met. We can actually put a grade or a score on the agent or on the AI itself. And so built-in quality management, I think, is another frontier that you'll see move really quickly in 2025. All right. So we've reached the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone in the panel for participating today. You guys were great. if you have questions, follow up, feel free to reach out to the Quiq team or any of the folks on the call here. My email is mike.myer, MYER, @quiq.com. And I'll make sure that if you don't have a direct contact with any of our panelists, that you're able to reach out through me as well. Thank you, guys. Anything you want to add before the end?
Thank you for
the conversation. Hours never enough for this kind
of. I thought we were going to be like done in 35, 40 minutes. And here we are at the top of the hour. We got to stop talking. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday season.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.